Hello to everyone. We're going to start our Analyze This class at the Chess Club and Scholastic Center of St. Louis. So basically this is the class where we're going to go over the games of members of the St. Louis Chess Club, and I'll try to give some useful feedback on these games. Our first game is an B28 Sicilian, Knight F3, A6. This is a pretty rare move for black, and fortunately I know a little bit about it because I played this as black as well, as a surprise weapon, and I even won a key game in my chess career with this move in the 2007 U.S. Women's Championship. In the last round, I had a must-win situation. I was black against Tatev Abrahamyan, and I played this move. It's a pretty interesting move to play against an open Sicilian player because it makes it difficult for white to play an open Sicilian. That's basically what this move is about. White is some aggressive e4 player who wants to play the open Sicilian with d4. a6 is a pretty good antidote against that because white's main options against this move are really not d4. He's got to go to other paths. So what are some other moves white can make here other than d4?
c4, excellent.
You think c4 is good? Yeah, c4, that's been played against me as well. You can go into this kind of Maroczy bind. What else? So I'll explain why the idea of this move a6, the B28 Sicilian. The idea is, well, let's say white plays d4. That's what happens in the game. Black takes. Well, first of all, you can include the move knight f6. That's kind of more accurate. So you're making a little attack on this pawn. Notice how this pawn can't advance yet because of a very typical move, queen a5. Double attack, check, and attack on this pawn wins a pawn for black. So you've got to protect this pawn with some move like knight c3 or bishop d3. And here you play e5. So you're kind of, you're carrying out this one typical idea for black in the Sicilian, which is this e5 move. And you also haven't committed your knight to c6 yet. You've made the pawn to a6 move instead, controlling this square. So very often the Sicilian, when that knight is attacked, the knight would go to b5. As you notice here, it doesn't have that square, so it's forced to go somewhere else. And the other point is, you haven't moved your d pawn so that your bishop is actually still free to come out of that diagonal. So I think if they play knight to, well, there are a couple of moves here for white. There's knight f5, there's knight b3, there's knight f3. If they go here, there's always the issue of that knight hanging in a tactical way, which allows black to play this move d5. Knight b3 allows this bishop to be developed more aggressively to b4, so he goes outside of the pawn chain, and you have not only d6 but also d5 ideas, kind of depends on what white does. And knight f3, I'm trying to remember the theory here. I mean, knight c6 seems reasonable, but I feel like you can also look at this move. This move probably works as well. Does it? Because if you take here, there's a little problem. Queen d5. Yeah, it's still interesting because you can play queen e7, for example, defending the mate threat on f7. And when they take, you can do something like d6. Oops, no, you don't want to do that first. You lose your bishop. But if you take and play d6 or even knight c6. It's kind of interesting because it looks like, you can get that knight on e5 back. Well, that's one of the things that black can look at, the move bishop b4 here immediately after knight f3. And I would think actually there's a lot of options for black here, not only knight takes e4, you can throw in the move queen e7 right away, and that move actually makes a lot of sense. Just putting pressure on the e file immediately, we can get rid of this arrow. So you're going to get back that e4 pawn soon. So one of the main ideas of the O'Kelly is basically this e5 move not having blocked in your dark squared bishop. And that's why it makes it hard for white to just play an open Sicilian. I think a tricky move here is a move like knight c3, which basically I think forces black to go into an e6 Sicilian. I think this is probably black's best move. There's a move b5, but this is kind of dangerous for black. And the other main move is going to c3 Sicilian. Also makes a lot of sense for white. Because you're saying, well, you're playing a c3 Sicilian, you've got in the move knight f3. Black has the move knight a6 in. And knight f3 is probably more useful. So black usually goes into this isolated pawn type of position. And I've had to play that as black as well. But so a6, not an amazing move, but it's certainly effective from stopping white playing the open Sicilian. In this game, white played the open Sicilian. So white wasn't deterred. He went for this line anyway. And now, like we saw, knight f6 attacking the pawn, and then e5 would have been the best way for black to play. Black played this move right away. Is there any big difference? Well, so far I don't see it. I see it. Okay. Why is this move right away less accurate than knight f6? Why is it better for black to include the move knight f6? We've actually seen it, so you guys should be able to figure it out.
I guess because of 92.
Well, did you notice how with knight f6 we were attacking this pawn, and okay, this is one, the best moves for white, and then you were always getting pinned in this unfortunate way on that diagonal, so you were basically forcing the knight out to that square. If you play e5 right away, okay, this move looks reasonable. I don't know if knight b3 or knight f3 is better. I know that knight f5 always runs into the typical move d5, and your e4 pawn is overloaded, so I wouldn't suggest that for white. So let's say you go knight f3. The main difference is that there's nothing to pin on b4. So that's unfortunate for black. It's not the end of the world, it's not a big deal. Knight f6. Tricky. Now, this pawn that looks like it's attacked is actually not attacked. Yeah, I guess it's kind of similar. Okay, you can't take this pawn because of queen a5, winning the knight. So white has to figure out a way to defend e4. Bishop d3 makes some sense. I can see, knight c3, you don't want to play that because of bishop b4. Yeah, I would consider this move. Certainly a decent alternative to knight c3 or knight d2. I mean, knight d2, it can't be a great move, right? It's a possible move. It can't be that critical. It's obviously a very passive way of developing the knight. So I'm sure black is going to get a good game after that. Black plays knight c6. That makes sense to me. Developing a piece, protecting e5, and being flexible as to what we're going to do with a d-pawn. Bishop d3, d5. Okay. I mean, you can sort of choose to play with this pawn on the board or trading this pawn. So you can consider, I think, a move like bishop c5. You can take a look at that move. That's also one of the benefits of the O'Kelly, again, because you haven't pushed that pawn out early, your bishop can develop along that diagonal. Bishop c5. Try to play with d6 with your bishop outside of the pawn chain. Seems like a reasonable plan for black, but certainly d5 can't be a mistake. White castles. Bishop e7. So seems reasonable. I mean, the game seems pretty balanced right now. Rook e1. There is some pressure on that pawn. So white wants to capture on d5 and capture that pawn. For that reason, black plays d4. So d4 is a pretty committal decision. I think after rook e1, my point is d4 is not an obvious move to me. That's not an obvious decision that I would make for black, because I think the main point of this, advance of the pawn is definitely to try to trade. Like if you think about it, you're trying to trade off this pawn for this pawn. So a pawn on d7 for a central pawn on e4, and you're going for the 4-on-3 majority on the king side. So when you get a chance to do that here, I would certainly think about that. d4 leaves the e4 pawn on the board. Okay. So it's a possible decision, but I think this move is certainly going to give black a decent game. Any questions about that?
Stockfish likes d4.
What are you saying?
Stockfish likes d4.
Stockfish likes d4, okay. Well, he likes taking the space advantage. It doesn't seem like, it doesn't seem like a bad move to me, it just doesn't seem obvious either for the decision. Okay, knight c4. Pawns attack bishop g4. The other way to protect it is queen c7. Yeah, bishop g4 also is kind of a committal way to protect the pawn. I mean, queen c7 is the sort of the non-committal way to protect it, right? I mean, you still have the ideas of b5 here. With bishop g4 h3, you're kind of setting yourself for either having to trade the bishop for the knight or retreating it and allowing white to play moves like that. And then you've got to be ready to sack a knight for 2 pawns, which I don't think is enough in this position. I think we can actually unpin with a move like that. And this doesn't seem like the kind of position where that piece sacrifice for 2 pawns is quite enough. So I'm not sure about the move bishop g4, because I think it's setting us up to trade off our bishop for a knight. I'm not sure that's the best thing. And I'm also a little bit worried, guys, about, when we trade off our light squared bishop, we've got a lot of pawns on dark squares. We've got a dark squared bishop, so I'm worried about the future of that piece. So bishop g4 seems like a questionable decision to me. It's not an obvious thing. So yeah, black decided to trade because I guess they didn't like the prospect of having to, sacrifice their piece here. Because by the way, yes, if the pin is broken, then white can simply capture that central pawn. So that's what black didn't like, and black made the capture instead. Yeah, I don't like that turn of events for black. Simply, yeah, I mean, you have to have a good reason to give up the bishop here, especially the better part of your bishop pair, which was, I think, the light squared bishop, because I don't see a whole lot of future for this bishop in this game. But we'll see. Let's see what happens. b5. I mean, black is obviously still okay. They've got some space advantage in the center. They don't have any, terrible pieces. So the game continues. Knight d2. It's forced. Black castles. a4. Interesting move by white. Anything else that comes to mind? I like a4. Trying to ask black what he wants to do about that pawn. If he wants to advance it, then maybe white gets the c4 square. If he takes, of course, an a4, then the rook comes into the game. a6 becomes weak. Well, I mean, a4 is interesting. I guess black has also a lot of choices. There's b4. There's queen b6. You can just defend the pawn. I mean, really, you can do a lot of things. It's not exactly even like taking was maybe not my favorite option, but you can still consider it with this idea of knight b4. And yeah, maybe this is, I don't know, maybe this is, and with the idea of knight d7 somewhere, knight takes d3 and knight c5. Still looks acceptable for black. I mean, I didn't love the idea of giving up a light squared bishop, but I think black still has a decent position. b4. I'm worried about that square. B4 is not the kind of the first move I would play. Yeah, that's for sure. You know what else is an interesting move here, guys? It's unusual, more unusual. I've given you the standard moves first. What kind of more unusual move does black have here? I don't know if it's good. What is it?
Queen A5.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I'm trying to pin the A pawn this way.
Doesn't it run on knight B3?
Well, see, that's the whole point.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
that's
yeah,
there's a pin that way. Yeah.
Somebody.
Yeah, there's no knight B3 because you lose the rook. You could play B3. I mean, I really just want to take the pawn A4 without it being protected. That's sort of my idea. It's not the end of the world. I mean, you could play something like B3.
Cyprus really likes queen B6.
He likes queen B6 here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a normal move. So the first move I gave you, the ones that don't really require like a lot of, you know, imagination, they just look like a good solid moves. Queen B6, you connect your rooks, you protect your pawn, and you don't give up the C4 square. So B4. All right. Well, black still alive. Queen E2, targeting A6. I would think about knight C4 as well. Think about that move. It's hard for white to sort of not play this move. At some point, it seems like the knight should occupy that square. I don't see what else. Where's the knight gonna go? Because the bishop, it's not easy to get the bishop there. There's always like knight A5, and if your knight's somewhere else, when the bishop goes back to A2, there's always B3 ideas. So I would think about this move as well, starting with that. All right, let's see what happens after queen E2. I guess, that's my guess about how black will protect the pawn. Queen B6, there's knight C4 tempo, A5, probably A5, you know. I think black's kind of went with the strategy of giving up his light squares a bit, putting a lot of pawns on the dark squares, and I think at this point, okay, this is what happens. Yeah, I mean, I don't see too much of a downside of putting yet another pawn on the dark squares, but, you know, if I'm black, guys, you know, you got to be a little bit concerned about how many pawns you're going to put on the dark squares when you've got a dark squared bishop. So I am concerned about these files. You know, especially the C4 square. I'm sure white, okay, white played knight B3. They want to target A5. Is that what I would do? Probably not. I'm not sure the knight is really that well placed here. But as to a plan for white, that's the difficult part. What kind of plan should we make? Okay, yeah. White should try, I think, with a knight on C4. I think that's the natural home for the knight. Which part of the board should white be playing on?
King side.
I think so. I think the king side. I think this is the sort of the natural plan for white. To play F4, get that dark squared bishop into the game, open up that light squared bishop on D3, play E5 if you get a chance. And I think the knight on C4 is just, you know, very effective. And now it's hard for black to remove it once that pawn especially is on A5. There's no knight A5. There's no way to remove that knight. I mean, okay.
The main reason I didn't want to play A5 was because I can't play knight A5 now to remove the knight because the C4.
Yeah, well, you know, you're in a quandary here because now there's a weakness. Okay, you don't have a bishop to guard it on, you know, C8 or B7. So you either have to tie down pieces to it, which is not ideal, right? I mean, you know, playing queen B6, not ideal. You're letting this move come with a tempo. Maybe you could do it. Maybe that's not so bad. And your queen protects E5, so you still have knight A5 ideas. Yeah, maybe that. A5, yeah, I can say it's not an ideal pawn formation for black. Black has starting to get too many weaknesses on the light squares. And by the way, there's one piece that's particularly bad in this position. You notice this piece? How you managed to put pawns to surround him, that he has no place to go to, I would worry about that. So I'm worried about what black is doing with the bishop on e7 and the knight on c6. All right, so knight b3, I don't think that's the right square for the knight. Because I think it's not that hard for black to protect a5. And I think your general idea is to play here. And I mean, you can find something for this knight to do on b3. I mean, you know, maybe one day you'll put your rook here and pressure d4. But I still think the knight would be more sort of powerful on c4. But maybe you can make a case for somehow leaving that square for the bishop. So we'll see. I'm just telling you my instincts. Knight d7, f4. So this happened. White is trying to open up the position for his bishops. Knight d7, I think knight d7 is a good move. Now the knight clearly has nothing to do on f6. It's time to transfer it and maybe bring it to c5. Make that trade. Although I do like white's position now. f4, is it the right time to play f4? You're giving up the e5 square. I don't know if we need to play f4 right now. Because black has positioned their knight perfectly to jump into that square. So should we be playing this move at the moment? I'm not sure. Takes, and here. That's an interesting positional decision. Not bad. Yeah, I think kind of feeling like f4 is coming too early, but I can see, yeah, black wants to trade off their bishop, don't they? What move comes into consideration here for white? What else can white consider doing after knight d7, other than f4?
Bishop to d5.
Yeah, bishop d5 doesn't really change anything in any fundamental way. You can do that. I can play rook c8. You're not threatening to take because I'm still protecting a5 with my queen. Bishop e5 is possible. What else? I mean, I would be concerned about black. What just happened?
Oh,
That's not supposed to happen. I'd be concerned about black carrying out this idea of trading off his poor dark squared bishop. What measures can we take to prevent that? I mean, you can't put a knight on f3 anymore to guard g5. So
h5.
Queen h5, interesting. Queen h5. I didn't think about that, but it's interesting. Yeah, not a bad square for the queen. I mean, especially if you're planning to play f4 one day. Actually, it's a pretty good square. Control g5, you attack h7. So when you play e5, there's kind of an attack.
Quiet move h6 after queen h5.
h6?
Yeah, renewing the threat.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you can do that. Yeah, you can renew the threat of bishop g5. Yeah, I don't see anything wrong with the move h6 here. I don't think there's any bishop sacrifice there at the moment. That works. Basically, I would think about this move, guys, as a prophylactic move for white. Whether you want to do it with queen h5 or before queen h5, I would think about it because, I'm looking at black's position and his main idea is to trade off this bad bishop. Everyone understands why this bishop is bad? You've got a lot of pawns in the dark squares and you've got a dark squared bishop, so you want to trade it off. And I would think about a move like that. Because on bishop g5, my idea is to play f4 and recapture with a pawn, not with the bishop. And given that I'm going to get some two strong pawns here supported by my bishop pair, I would think that white is doing well in a position like that. If you take, I take. That's what I'm going for. Here, rook back. I would prefer white here. So I would think about making a move like g3. I don't know. We can see what the computer says. What does our little friend say? Bishop b5 is one of the moves he looks at, and then what does he want to do after that? Yeah, he doesn't like f4. You see, he immediately changes the evaluation to even, so it's kind of coming too early. So he's looking for some other moves. Now, if we could just get rid of that so I can see what actual line he's showing here. It doesn't say. What does he want to do after bishop b5, rook c8, let's say? Queen g4. So he's taking measures just at bishop g5, yeah. What about bishop? Why is he looking at this move? Because of the pawn hanging. Yeah, you can't trade here quite yet because your pawn on a5 hangs. Yeah, there is that issue, although it's pretty interesting. Rook g6. Yeah, I don't think you have enough compensation there. All right. Well, let's go back a little bit. I don't know. From a human point of view, I think g3 makes sense. So f4 coming too early, I think this is what black is looking for, because first of all, black is perfectly positioned to put a knight on e5, and I like this move bishop g5 as well. It's a good positional decision. Offering a trade of those bishops, and later on you're going to occupy the square, and I can see black even being better here. So that's how unfortunate I think is this early move f4, which is probably going to lead to the trade of those dark squared bishops. Yeah, that's what happened. It's hard to avoid that trade now, because if you try to avoid it, the bishop gets a good square on e3, and you also, it's hard to get rid of it. So, but I think this turn of events is definitely in black's favor. Black has a great outpost for their knight in the center, and you have a light squared bishop, and now you got a lot of pawns on the light squares. So that was good for black. Okay, probably a good decision to get rid of that bishop. You could also consider, by the way, this move. I would look at that with the idea of transferring that bishop to d5. Pretty good square, actually, for the bishop. Targeting here, targeting here. Yeah, I like the move bishop c4. It's kind of a more aggressive move. Something like that. The bishop is pretty powerful where he is. And then you can consider rook d1, and knight takes d4. That pawn becomes a bit weak. Queen f2 if you need to attack it again. Actually, I still kind of like white after the move bishop c4. Bishop b5, maybe. Any questions, guys? No? Okay. Knight e5. Rook d1. Okay, makes sense. We're attacking the pawn. Okay, tricky move. You want to win a pawn if there's an exchange of queens. Pawn takes, and the knight's attacked, and that pawn is attacked. So that is white's idea. He wants to win a pawn. Knight e5. Aha, tricky response. So there's a tactic here, guys, now related to that square, so that if white takes, that pawn black captures on d4, white captures, knight check, king somewhere, queen takes queen here, and black wins a piece. That's black's idea. So knight e5 is a good little tricky move. That's why white moved their king away. How does black protect that d-pawn? Seems to me like black is in a little bit of trouble here, because he's got that pawn hanging, this pawn hanging. The knight's pinned. I would say that black is looking to be worse here. You're wondering probably how I'm changing my evaluations like so quickly without any particular reason. Like first I say black's better, then I say black's worse. I don't really say where the mistake came from. Okay, let me try that again. Let me see if I can make a more logical explanation of what just happened. So yeah, I feel like, white was better in this position. This move, I do think it kind of gives black a relief. And I'm happy to see the trade of those bishops. However, you know, we still have that problem with the d pawn, the d4 pawn. I like the move bishop c4, bishop b5. My feeling is like black should be able to do something here. Now, this move, yeah, that makes sense. Anything else we can do? Okay, let's try this. Okay, here, here. So you want to win that pawn. Rook d8, all right. Takes, takes, and queen b5. And I still don't really see a solution for black, do I? Uh-huh. What if black simply defended that knight? That might make some sense. What if black just made a move like this? Maybe this was more solid for black. Because you've got the d pawn protected. You've got your knight protected, so the main idea of this move is simply to protect the knight. You've got your a pawn protected. For black? Yes. I mean, I might look for counterplay with this rook, which is the only piece that can sort of move, like rook a to b8. I'm probably going to try to kick out your queen. And so my idea, like, let me just show you some general moves. I'm making a pass for white. So I want to try to use this rook. Now you move here. I want to try to put it here. So I am going to try to get counterplay here. Now you're going to take this pawn, and I was hoping that I could do something. Unfortunately, if I take, I can't take this pawn because this rook is hanging. So that idea doesn't quite work. So do I have any dangerous discovered attacks here on the queen? I don't see them. So maybe I can't do that. Yeah, I mean, there are different ideas. Yeah, you can also play queen f6 to defend the knight. You got to, you know, this is the kind of moment that it's not like so easy to figure out, like immediately the difference between queen g6 and queen h6 and queen f6. Like all of them do that. It seems reasonable, queen f6.
What about e5 here?
e5, not such a big problem because now I go here, and I would think that if you advance your e-pawn, just the counterplay against c2 would be helpful for black.
Can you play e6 here?
Okay. You want to go e6. That's a big problem. I can take on c2. All right, now it gets really dangerous for black, but let me try that move. Which one? Rook c1? I want to take the knight. Well, you want to try to maybe get my king out. I would think that you'd want to expose my king, right? I was thinking I could take.
Queen e7.
But then the king just runs to g8. So I was thinking I could survive this position, although I agree that it looks very perilous for black.
But
What, queen b7?
After king g8, after queen b7 and king g8,
Yeah.
is there knight takes d4?
What's that? What is it that you want?
Because isn't your rook on a8 going to be here?
Sure, but you're not better there. In fact, you're probably, if anything, you're going to be worse there, right? Because I'm just going to take, and after you take, I don't have to take your rook. I can just do queen c5. And, I mean, certainly black's not worse here. White's the one who's going to be worse here because he's pinned, and he's going to have to be careful not to lose. This move wins the game. Look at that. Remember that rook that you wanted to take? You can take it. Okay, we've got a little discovered check that wins the queen. Okay. Well, I'm just saying, I don't know. I do agree this position looks dangerous for black. I don't love bringing my king out in the center. I'm not sure that it's completely losing for black. What's my bet on what the computer would say about this? I would say the computer would say that it's bad for black. Probably after some move like knight c5. Let's see. What's computer say? Computer says completely winning for white. It says, first of all, knight a1. Well, that's a move I couldn't even consider. A second move that I did consider was knight c5, a little bit more natural, you know, to move forwards rather than backwards. Now, we can try to figure out why this move would be winning. What is so wonderful about this move? What is even the idea of this retreat? Well, he's attacking the queen and moving away his knight from attack. And after this move, okay, I see. What he wants to do is, when we keep our knight protected, he wants to give that check and keep our king in the center. Yeah. Well, when our king is not allowed to go back to G8, I agree that it's going to be bad news. Yeah. So knight A1. Okay, that's a strong move. Yeah, I had a feeling like something is wrong with our king coming out into the open. That's a good idea. E5, E6.
I was unexpected that.
Queen B5. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. White has the initiative. I agree with that. You know, White's.
What is the computer technique?
What does our weak computer program say? He says knight E5. And how does he want to exactly defend that pawn? Wait, what happened after king H1? Queen G3. Oh, that's what happened. Okay, well, let's continue then. All right, so he likes the move knight E5, threatening knight F3, king H1, and queen G3. Okay, nice way to defend the D4 pawn. You can't take the pawn because of rook D4, and your rook on E1 is hanging, so that doesn't work. Okay, nice. And also you're threatening to get rid of your weakness on D4. So now black is looking pretty good again, in my clueless analysis. Queen E2.
I put the arrow there because that's what I should have played.
You should have played that, but you didn't play that? What did you play?
Terrible.
But that's what the game says. This is how it went.
Yeah, this is how it went, but I should have played D3.
Oh, you should have played D3. That's why you put the arrow. Yeah. You could have gotten rid of that weakness right away. It just seems like a simple and good move, right? All right, rook here. Yeah, it's not really going anywhere, is it? It's not really going anywhere in the sixth.
Time pressure moves.
Yeah, we lost that pawn. That was unfortunate. And then, okay, we're threatening mate. I would play rook F1. No, that's not what happened. Knight F5 is pretty good too. I was thinking you could even do that. Guard the F2 square. Knight F5, queen G5.
H4 wins.
H4 wins because you're trapping the queen or something. And then you want to play knight E7 and rook E5. Yeah. So what are we in? White's better. White's up a pawn. Did White win this endgame? White's up a pawn, and black's king is weaker. So that's a big advantage for white here. What do you guys think about that decision? Should white trade? Should white trade queens? Like, whose king is weaker? So if black's king is weaker, why is white trading queens?
Well, I was worried that C2 was going to fall.
Sure. Well, how about this move then? Keep your C pawn protected. But, you know, keep this king, keep the queens on the board for this king. I mean, like, look, you have ideas of attacking that king. The king seems weaker than your king, plus your queen seems very active, you know? Like, I don't know, in this position, I wouldn't be in a hurry to trade queens at all. Because, you know, they say a lot of rook endgames are drawn, and being down a pawn in a rook endgame is not such a big deal. Like, if I was black, I would feel like by you trading queens, I'd be bailing out into something safer. Like, I would feel more confident that I could draw that position because I'm only down a pawn in a rook endgame. That's not a big material deficit. That's not like a big reason why I can't draw. But if the queens are on the board, and I not only have to worry about being down a pawn, but I also have to worry about my king safety because my king is weaker. I don't know. I don't see any reason not to keep the queens on the board. I guess, what are you worried about? Like the rook coming here or something, some active move like this? Yeah, I mean...
I didn't analyze much because we were in time trouble, so I... Yeah.
Sure, you know, you have different ideas of getting, you know, a rook to the G file. Even like a check, like on E1, king goes away and it seems pretty safe. So yeah, I understand you're not analyzing much. I'm saying to you, I didn't analyze much either, but my impression is that by trading, you're making it easier for black to play, because the general idea is that if you are if your opponent's king is weaker than yours, you try to keep the queens on the board. That's all. It's not a matter of analysis. It's just, if you don't like this move, then you can make this move. It's the same idea. I just think your chances of winning are better if you keep the queens on the board, because black always has to worry about the king, and it's weaker than white's king. So this move, I'd feel like, okay, suddenly I'm getting chances to draw again. In fact, I'd be pretty happy here as black. Rook c1. Yeah, you want to put the rook behind the passed pawn, right, to push it. That's interesting.
Yeah, Prakash actually recommended that move.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting move, yeah. I mean, it's unusual. It's unusual, but you want to play something like c4 and just have the rook behind the passed pawn where it's well positioned. I can see that. Okay. I mean, it's hard to activate this rook, right, because you're just going here. And I think if I go here, even just advancing the pawn is probably just quite dangerous, because it just goes forward supported by the rook from behind, and black is not in time to stop it. I'm not in time to go here and put a rook here. So looks like a pretty good move. I mean, I like that move. It's the idea of, rooks belong behind passed pawns. So your passed pawn is the c pawn. You want to push it, and you're putting the rook there. So I like that move. King f8, okay. c4. I would take, yeah. Rook takes, rook b8, yeah. b3, fine. Yeah, this is just the kind of position, I wouldn't be so happy to get as black. First of all, I don't see the point of that. What's that?
Just didn't want to display b5 and get a pass pawn. I wanted to deal with that a pawn.
Okay, this is really passive, right? So we just visually, guys, this rook is, on this open, semi-open file. Instead of it's going passively to a8, it's not the kind of move I would even think about. I mean, white has good winning chances here, what can I say? But still, in a rook endgame, you always have some sort of leeway. Rook a8, it's a bit passive. King comes up. Rook here, okay. The rook is in a good position on b5 here. So I think black has gotten too passive. So who won this? Yeah, I mean, this is kind of looking like it's like bad news for black when this rook is so active and this rook is so passive. So that's the kind of thing you really can't afford yourself when you're down material, is then you're down material plus you're getting so passive. So I would never put that rook on a8 and try to hold that position like that. Better to, like here, in this position, I mean, it's a key moment. So far, everything is okay. So you played rook b8, b3. What would I do as black? Let me try to hold this position. Nothing's really being threatened yet. Unless you move your king over here, then your rook can get active. All right, so, okay, king e7. Now what? So in a rook endgame, there's a reason why it's said that all rook endgames are drawn. It's because even being down a pawn in a rook endgame is not such a big disadvantage, right? So, but the main thing is you got to keep your pieces active. If your rook, you can trade the b pawn for the a pawn. It's not like, oh, my opponent has a passed pawn, so I'm going to lose the rook endgame. That's not the right way to look at it. Yes, that is a possible trade, and the reality is you can hold tons of rook endgames like that when your opponent has some passed pawn, especially if your rook gets to be behind the passed pawn and their rook is in front of it. That's a good scenario for making a draw. Like I recently had a game like that. I was down a pawn in a rook endgame, an a pawn, like against Ivanchuk. And my rook was well positioned behind the passed pawn. His rook was in front of it. And there were pawns on the king side, and he couldn't make any progress. So The main thing to remember is to keep your pieces active, and even if these pawns are traded, to try to get your rook behind the passed pawn where it's stopping the pawn and also targeting the kingside pawns, that would be a great square for it. And meanwhile, if that's not happening, well, just just never, this move never should cross your mind. Ever. I'm sorry, just that it's a very instructive mistake, and the lesson is you can't play the rook endgame passively, especially when you're down material. What's your only chance? Well, keep your pieces active. Like I said, it's okay to be down a pawn in a rook endgame from the point of view of making a draw, as long as your pieces are active. Look, you can get so much counterplay. It's so difficult for your opponent to win, to figure out, what he should do. He's got to hold on to his kingside pawns. He's got to figure out how to make a pawn breakthrough. Of course it's not easy, right? He's got this idea. He can try to win a second pawn. That's why actually white winning a second pawn is much more dangerous than white trading off the A pawn for the B pawn. That's actually a more dangerous idea, like this. If you go here, he goes here, and you're forced to kind of protect the pawn like that. Well, he can try that. Yeah, the king, this check, the king goes up. It's not so pleasant. No, maybe we should do it. How can we do it? So the plan, white's plan, is to come support that pawn with the king and free up the rook and attack the A pawn. Okay, that's white's plan. So we got to figure out some way to stop that. That's why my first intention really was to activate this rook like that. And so if you're going here, then I want to go here, and I want to put my rook here where it stops your king from moving without you having to worry about your king side. So you could play king g1, rook d2, and then still go for this type of position. You'll probably have to go for this sooner or later. Now the only difference is I haven't had time to put my rook here, so you still have a chance to move your rook out from a5 and support the a4 pawn from the side rather than from in front, which is generally better. So you can get some position like this, or actually even better, like this. But here, I don't know, is it better? Because maybe I have that move. And I make it hard for your rook to stay on the 5th rank. Yeah, this is also not like an easy position for white to win. It's like, when it gets down to positions like that, it's a lot about precise calculation. Like, can white, white's not going to be able to promote that pawn without bringing the king up. But when they bring the king up, they have to figure out what's happening when they sacrifice their king side. So it becomes white also has a little bit of risk here. It's not just like a free, it's not like they have an extra pawn, the more active rook, the more active king, and everything is as smooth as butter. So that's the kind of position I'd strive for as black if I wanted to save myself in this type of rook endgame. Any questions, guys? No? Okay, we got one game.